together with end-user license agreements that say the users are not allowed to own books. Amazon says all the books belong to us. That's Amazon's idea of private property. Amazon owns all books. And the users can only lease the book under Amazon's choice of conditions. Then there's the freedom to keep the book as long as you wish. Amazon eliminates that with a back door, which is capable of remotely erasing books. We know about this by observation. In 2009, Amazon remotely erased thousands of copies of a particular book, an Orwellian act. And what was the book? It was 1984 by George Orwell. The book that gave us the phrase, Big Brother is watching you. The book that presents a totalitarian state. Well, there was a lot of criticism of Amazon, and Amazon promised it would never do this again unless ordered to by the state. Which, if you've read 1984, is not very comforting, because in that book, the crimes of this totalitarian state start with burning any books it doesn't like. The official name of that product is the Kindle. Kindle means to start a fire. Perhaps that's meant to suggest that the real purpose of that product is virtually burning people's books. Except Amazon says those books don't belong to those people. You must never tolerate when they want to lease you a copy instead of letting it be your copy. Oh, and then there's the case of nearly all portable phones. Some phones are smartphones, and the user, to a limited extent, is allowed to change the software in them. And some phones are not smartphones, meaning the user can't change the software, but it's still a computer running software that can be changed by the phone company or by someone else, just not by the user. And this software is malware. It has a surveillance functionality. It will transmit the GPS location on remote command. You can't guess again, because once it's been converted, if you push the turn off button, it pretends to turn off, but really it keeps running and listening and transmitting. The only way is our Stalin's dream. That's why I refuse to have one. There are some things we must not accept, no matter how convenient they are, no matter how much people pressure us to have one. We have to tell them, this is an attack on our freedom, and I'm not going to carry one, and I don't care what you think. Do whatever you like. You won't make me carry a portable tracking and surveillance device, because it's every citizen's duty to stick a finger in Big Brother's eye. So I've just given you a list of several proprietary software packages that are malware. And this is enough to prove my point, because these are so popular, so widely used, almost everybody that uses non-free software is using at least one of these. And by the way, Android, as it's usually distributed, is malware also. It's not all free software. There are proprietary things in there, and they're malware. But these are just a few examples. There are thousands of other proprietary programs. Are they malware? Usually we don't know and we can't tell because we don't have their source code. We can't check what they do. Maybe they're malware, maybe they're not. But every non-free program that doesn't come with source code requires blind faith. It's just trust us software. We're a corporation. You know you can trust corporations. No corporation would ever mistreat people. So trust us. That's what their message is. Malware is so common in proprietary software now that proprietary software today is software for suckers. But what about free software? Free software rarely has malicious functionality. And the reason is the users have a defense. The users have control. And we know it. So we know that we don't have power. And thus we don't feel the same temptation. It's not a perfect defense, but it's much better than being defenseless. So, the result is, if you use proprietary software nowadays, you're going to be mistreated over and over. But with free software, we have a chance of protecting ourselves. It's the only known defense against malware. Of course, most users are not programmers. And when they use free software, they're not going to study the source code or change it. But there are other users of the same program who are programmers. And they sometimes read the source code because they want to fix a bug or add a feature. But in the process, they're also checking for anything that shouldn't be there. And if they find anything that's bad, they'll fix it, of course, to protect themselves. But they'll also announce this and protect everybody else. So in the community, there are some who are programmers, and they protect themselves, and by doing so, they protect the whole community. So society has a choice. On one hand, we have individual freedom, social solidarity, and democracy. Because a free program develops democratically. All the users are free to participate in deciding how it will develop. On the other hand, with proprietary software, the owner has power over the users. The program itself is an instrument of that unjust power. And the developer or owner uses the program to subjugate users and then command them, exploit them, and abuse them. Society must reject proprietary software and choose free software. The aim of the free software movement is the liberation of cyberspace, including all of you. We invite you to escape from proprietary software and come live with us in the free world that we have built. I started the free software movement in 1983 when I announced the plan to develop a free operating system, GNU. I wanted to make it possible to use a computer in freedom. That was impossible because in 1983, all the operating systems for modern computers were proprietary. So if you bought a computer, to make it useful, you had to get a non-free operating system installed, and that took away your freedom. There was no way to buy a new computer and use it in freedom. So I set out to change that. Not through a political movement, because I was one man with little fame and little money, and few people agreed with me, so I didn't think that we would get very far with an ordinary political movement. And besides, I had no experience launching that. I was not a political activist, I was an operating system developer. But that meant there was another way I could achieve this goal. All I had to do was write an operating system. Then, as the author, I could legally make it free software, and then everybody would be able to use computers in freedom by running my system. In other words, I could give users freedom by doing technical work in my own field. I was aware of the injustice of proprietary software, which most people did not recognize as an injustice. I had the skills necessary to rescue people from this injustice, and it looked like nobody would do it if not me. That meant I had been elected by circumstances to do this work. It was my duty. It's as if you see somebody drowning and you know how to swim and there's no one else around and it's not Bush, then you have a moral duty to save this person. Gee, you should be laughing now. What's wrong? Well, perhaps that statement is too strong. Perhaps we could identify some other people about whom I should not make the claim that you have a moral duty to save them, like Bush's torturers and the people like Obama that protect Bush's torturers, and who knows how many others. Fortunately, I don't need to resolve those questions because I don't know how to swim. But in the real case in my life, the work to be done was not swimming, it was writing lots of code, and I knew how to do that. So I decided to develop an operating system that would be entirely free software. Every piece would be free software. Because if one piece is proprietary, that piece subjugates the users. To make the users free, we have to get rid of all non-free software. We have to make sure it's 100% made of free software, not just 99%. Then I decided to recruit others to help write it, to get it finished sooner. Then I decided to make it a Unix-like system. Unix was a proprietary, that is, unjust, operating system with certain technical advantages, and it was popular. So, by making a Unix-like system, I could have the same technical advantages, and by making it compatible, I could make it easy for all the Unix users to switch to my system. Then, I gave it a name, which is a joke. Because that's the hacker spirit. No matter how serious your project is, there's still room for jokes. The name of the system is GNU, spelled G-N-U and pronounced GNU. And this name is a recursive acronym. GNU stands for GNU's Not Unix. Of course, programmers love jokes with recursion. But in order for it to be a joke, it needs two meanings. Just the recursive acronym, that's one meaning. It has to have another meaning. Why GNU instead of ANU, FNU, SNU, UNU? Because those are not words. They would only have one meaning. GNU is a word, so it has a meaning already, and then you add the recursive acronym, now you've got two meanings, and it's a joke. GNU is the name of this animal that lives in Africa. This is an adorable GNU that needs a home. And I hope it will get a home today. So, so GNU is a joke, but it's better than that because GNU is the most humor-charged word in the English language, used in countless wordplays. Because according to the dictionary, the G is silent and it's pronounced new. So every time you want to write the word new, You can spell it, instead of spelling it N-E-W, you can spell it G-N-U, and you've got a joke. Perhaps not a very good joke, but there are lots of them. So we've learned to associate this word with laughter. It's the perfect name for any software project. However, when it's the name of our system, please do not follow the dictionary. Because if you say, I'm using the new operating system, you're mistaken. We've been working on it for 30 years. We've been using it for 22 years. It's not new anymore. But it still is GNU, and it will always be GNU. There's another erroneous pronunciation you need to avoid, which sounds like Linux. Strange to say, millions of people, when they talk about the GNU system, call it Linux. This is wrong, but they do it. We have to teach them this system is GNU. Here's why they make the mistake. In 1990, we had almost all of the GNU system, but one major component was missing. That was the kernel. The kernel of an operating system is the component that provides the resources to all the other programs that you run. So we started developing a kernel for GNU in 1990. I chose an advanced, elegant design, and one that I thought would enable us to get it finished sooner. But instead, my design made it a sort of research project, and it took years to have a test version, which was sad. But fortunately, we didn't have to wait for that, because in 1992, Mr. Torvalds, who had written a proprietary kernel called Linux, freed it. And once Linux was free, people could fit Linux into the gap in the GNU system. So the gap, GNU was almost complete, and the remaining gap was filled by Linux, making a system which was basically GNU with Linux. In other words, the GNU plus Linux operating system, or GNU/Linux. The problem is that the people who combined Linux with the various big and small pieces that were waiting to be the GNU system were so focused on this last component, Linux, that they thought of all the rest as a small add-on. And they started talking about this whole thing as a Linux system, which didn't fit the facts, but other people followed them, and this confusion has spread. And that's how it happened that millions of people are using this variant of the GNU system, and they don't know it. They don't know it's the GNU system. They think the whole thing is Linux. They think the whole thing was started by Mr. Torvalds in 1991, which is about 7 years after we really started it. So it's not nice to us. If you call the system Linux, you're treating us badly by not giving us credit for our work. So please give us equal mention. Please call the system GNU/Linux. It only takes you an extra second to say GNU/ or type GNU/. You can spare 1 second to treat us right. But there's something more important at stake here than just credit. Credit, after all, is a matter of ego, and there are more important things in life, like your freedom. The problem is, if you call the system by the wrong name, that's dangerous for your freedom also. Here's how. You see, the name GNU since 1983 has been associated with our ideas of freedom. The name Linux is associated with different ideas, the ideas of Mr. Torvalds. Unfortunately, Torvalds doesn't agree with the free software movement. He doesn't believe you deserve freedom in your computing. He doesn't believe he deserves freedom in his computing. He says he's happy to use proprietary software if it's convenient and reliable. Well, he's entitled to state his views. He is not entitled to cite our tremendous labor as if it were his work and use it as a platform to attack the ideas that motivated our doing this work. But that's what happens when people attribute his work, when people attribute our work to him. The users install this variant of the GNU system and they think it's Linux. They think it comes from Mr. Torvalds. They think he started it, so they admire him tremendously for doing our work. And then they follow his ideas and they don't even think about ours. Which means they don't learn to value their own freedom. They never even think about the idea that they might deserve freedom in their computing, and that means they don't join in our struggle. We could all lose because they are not fighting. This is why it's important. The name Linux is associated with not caring about freedom, just caring about convenience. The name GNU is associated with caring about freedom. So which idea are you going to refer people to? You have a chance to spread awareness of the issue of freedom in computing just by calling the system by the proper name. But nowadays, we have another obstacle. Lots of people don't talk about free software. They talk about these programs, but they don't call them free. They never say 自由. Instead, they call the software open source. The term open source was coined in 1998 by people in the free software community who rejected the free software movement. People like Torvalds and others who agreed with him. They didn't want to talk to people about freedom. They wanted the ideas of freedom to be buried and forgotten. So they coined another term, and they developed a different discourse, a different set of ideas. They omitted the entire ethical level of the issue, and they based their discourse solely on practical convenience values, like making reliable, convenient software. So they argued that if you follow the same practices that we had been following, and they had been following, the things we call free software, they said if you follow those practices, the users will make your code better. So for us, the values are freedom and community. For them, the values are code quality, convenience. Shallow, secondary, less important values. And this difference is crucial because ultimately our future depends on what we value. People who think about freedom may fight for their freedom. People who never think about freedom certainly won't fight for their freedom. They lose their freedom and they don't understand what they've lost. So the people who talk about open source, the people who started that, they intentionally tried to avoid teaching people to value freedom. But since there's so many of them, lots of articles about me and my work say open source. They misrepresent what I stand for. I get email every week, several times, from people who say they appreciate what I've done for open source. And I write to them saying, I'm afraid you've been misinformed. I don't agree with open source. I am a leader in the free software movement, and I'm working for freedom for computer users, including you. And open source is the slogan of people who disagree with my views. I've even seen articles published that called me the father of open source. You can imagine what that makes me feel. But I found a constructive way to respond. I sent a letter to the editor saying, if I'm the father of open source, it was conceived through artificial insemination using stolen sperm without my knowledge or consent. Then I explained I explained about the free software movement and what we stand for. And this is the real purpose of the letter, to teach the people who read the article about the free software movement, the ideas that were missing in the article itself. But it's always fun to start with a joke. However, I can't do enough of this job by myself. We need your help. You can spread the ideas of the free software movement. Just by saying free Libre software, 自由软件, you can help direct the conversation towards the important issues of freedom. Especially when you're in a conversation where other people are saying open. You can make a big difference by not going along with them, by saying, I'm not talking about openness, I'm talking about our freedom. This is free software. The word open is a weak word. It talks about something that sounds nice but isn't a sharp point. So of course the people who don't want to stand for something strong, they like to say open. It's vague. It doesn't commit them ethically to anything. You have the chance to help spread the ideas of free software and freedom. If people don't think about these ideas, they can still develop free software. Nearly all the programs whose developers call them open source are, in fact, free software. But they can, if they don't value freedom, they can go astray in other ways. For instance, Sun acquired an office suite called Star Office and released a version of it as free software. But Sun was not supporting the free software movement ethically. Sun called it open source. And guess what? We found out that Open Office came with a list of extensions made by other developers, and some of those extensions were non-free. Now that was a serious problem for us because we think it's wrong to ever recommend a non-free program to anyone. And by distributing Open Office or recommending distros that had Open Office, we or you were recommending these non-free extensions. So we developed another list of extensions. Then later people forked Open Office, making people who are free software supporters, they forked Open Office and their version they called LibreOffice because they are fighting for freedom. So they took over our replacement list of extensions because they don't want to recommend the non-free program. And this is tremendously important. You see, our message is non-free software is an injustice. If you recommend a non-free program to somebody as a solution, that contradicts the idea that non-free software is the problem. So we must, to be coherent, we must not treat a non-free program as a solution. We have to say, this is the problem. And this non-free program also is the problem. Distributions. And most of them are not free. Most of them contain some non-free software. So they don't totally respect your freedom. Therefore, we have a list of the distros that do respect your freedom. You can find it in GNU.org/distros. If you want to make sure you don't get any non-free software, look there. When we approve a distro, it means that the distro has maintainers who have committed to removing any non-free software if somebody finds any in the distro. After all, nobody's perfect, and checking up a whole GNU/Linux distro is a giant job. So we don't insist that they have to have checked it perfectly. What we do insist is they will fix any errors. If non-free software slipped through and is found, they'll remove it. So that's what a free distro does. But nowadays, Linux is not free software either, because there are pieces of code in Linux which are non-free. They're called binary blobs. And these are executable programs dressed up as source code. They're present in Linux because Torvalds decided to include them. Which means if you get Torvalds' version of Linux, there's non-free software in that. If you want a free system, you can't use Torvalds' version of Linux. So we have our own version of Linux, which we call Linux Libre. We take Torvalds' source code and we delete the blobs. And that means only free software is left. It's not a lot of work because we have a script to do it. Every time Torvalds releases another version of Linux, we run the deblobber script and we make the new version of Linux Libre. And the symbol of Linux Libre is a penguin cleaning itself with a brush. So this way we make a kernel that's free so that we can have a GNU/Linux system where all of it is free. Of course, we have to ask, why did Torvalds do that? Well, the first thing is because he doesn't value freedom as a principle. He saw no particular reason to refuse. But he didn't do this frivolously. He did have a practical reason to include these blobs. And the reason is there are peripherals or coprocessors that won't work without these blobs. Now that's the real underlying problem that we have to correct. In the short term, what we have to do is put freedom first. If a peripheral can't run in a free system, we can't use it, because the price of using it would be our freedom. And we're not going to recommend this non-free software to anybody. So for the moment, the price of freedom is don't use those peripherals or coprocessors. Now, really what we want to do is come up with free software to run them. And in the long term, we can do that. Sometimes we can convince a company to cooperate. And we try. But often companies just won't listen to us. So what do we do next? Reverse engineering. Reverse engineering is the way to fix these problems. With reverse engineering, you can figure out how to use the hardware of the peripheral. And once we know that, somebody can write a free program to do the job. So if you want to make a technical contribution that's very important, do reverse engineering. This university should start classes in reverse engineering. In fact, people who do reverse engineering get very good pay. So it's a good career also. So these are two reasons why the university should teach this skill. So we need to develop our community's reverse engineering capacity so that we can figure out how to run these peripherals and therefore develop free software to run them and thus fix the underlying problem. Now, it should be classes in reverse engineering aimed specifically at hardware. That is, not how the hardware is constructed, but how you use it. We don't need to know what the circuits are inside the hardware. It's irrelevant to us. We just need to know how to use the hardware. In fact, it's unconscionable that the manufacturers won't tell us. These companies say, we'll sell you this hardware. We won't tell you how to use it. That they refuse to do. Instead they say, here's a non-free program that will run the hardware. Use this non-free program and shut up. Well, we shouldn't take that from them. I think it would be reasonable as a consumer protection measure to legally require publication of the specs for how to run any piece of hardware being sold to consumers. So if software is needed to run the hardware, they've got to publish the hardware interface specs so that people can write their own software to use that hardware. But until they do it, we have to do the job of freeing the specs of the hardware. So this is the way you can make the biggest technical contribution. But if you want to make a big contribution the biggest contribution of any kind, become a speaker and an organizer like me. We need lots of people to speak about the need for free software, especially when you're in a place where there are lots of open source people, where ethics has been forgotten. You can bring ethics back in. Now, nowadays, you might find you're running a non-free program that you didn't even know was in your computer. Many web pages contain programs written in JavaScript, and most of them are non-free. Most of those programs are non-free. The web page introduces that software, installs it into the browser, and it gets run in your computer. So we need to prevent that. Therefore, we have a program called LibreJS. LibreJS is an add-on for Firefox and its variants, which analyzes the JavaScript code in every web page that tries to load JavaScript code to see if it's either free or trivial. And in those cases, the code can run. But if it's non-free and non-trivial, it's blocked. LibreJS blocks it and warns you. This page is trying to run non-free JavaScript code. And by the way, some of that code is malicious too. There's JavaScript code to try to spy on users and track users. There's one other feature in LibreJS. If you've ever tried to complain to webmasters, you know that they don't make it easy. Well, LibreJS searches through the pages of the site heuristically to find how to contact the webmasters so that you can do it very quickly. It says, well, I found this address and this phone number. If you click on the address, then you can send a message there. And it only takes a minute. You just type in, I couldn't use your site because it tried to run a non-free JavaScript program. Please fix that. Period. Send. Less than a minute. You could send 10 complaints every day. Please do that. These complaints are very important. We need to convince the webmasters to fix this problem. The way we do that is by sending them lots of complaints. Now, schools must teach exclusively free software. And I mean all schools of all levels and all other educational activities, such as adult education. All educational activities must teach free software exclusively. And this is not just so they can save license fees. Sure, it's nice to save money for the schools, but that's a secondary benefit. This issue is about more than just how to make education a little more efficient. This is about how to do good education instead of bad education. Teaching a non-free program is bad education. The school has a social mission to educate good citizens of a strong, capable, independent, cooperating, and free society. In the computing field, that means preparing good users of free software who are ready to live in a free digital society. Teaching the use of a non-free program contradicts the social mission of the school because that is implanting dependence, imposed dependence on a particular entity. Schools must never do that. But why do some proprietary developers offer gratis copies or cheap copies of their non-free software to schools? It's because they are trying to use those schools to implant dependence on their product. It's the same reason why drug traffickers might say the first dose is gratis, because they're trying to get people hooked. Well, these developers want the school to get the students hooked. But the school must say no. However, there's a deeper reason why schools must teach only free software: for the education of the best programmers. Some people are natural-born programmers. They reach the age of 10 to 13 and they become fascinated with software, and if they use a program, they want to know how it works. But when they ask the teacher, how does it do this? If a program is proprietary, the teacher can only say, I'm sorry, we're not allowed to know, it's a secret. And thus, education is not allowed. Proprietary software is knowledge withheld from the students. It's the enemy of the spirit of education, so it must not be tolerated in the school. But if the program is free, the teacher can explain what he knows, then give each of these kids a copy of the source code, saying, read this and you'll understand everything. And since those kids are fascinated, they'll read it. And the teacher can say, if you come across a point in the code you can't understand, show it to me, and we'll figure it out together. That gives our natural-born programmers the opportunity to learn a vital lesson. That part of the code is badly written, so don't write code that way. That's how you should not write code. To develop from natural-born programmers to good programmers, they need to learn how to write good, clear code, which means they need to learn what is not good, clear code. And the way you learn that is by reading code and seeing it's hard to understand, and when you eventually do understand it, you realize, that's the wrong way. I'm not going to write it like that. How do you learn to write good, clear code? You do it by reading lots of code and writing lots of code. Only free software gives you the chance to read the code of large programs that we really use. But then you've got to write lots of code. You've got to write code for large programs. But in order to do that, in order to confront the challenges of large programs, you have to start small, which does not mean writing small programs. Small programs is not even getting started. The way you start small in working on large programs is by writing small changes in existing large programs. And then you can write bigger changes until eventually you can write big changes in large programs. Only free software gives you the chance to write changes, small than large, in the large programs we really use. Any school can offer the chance to master the craft of programming if it is a free software school. But there's an even deeper reason for moral education and citizenship. Schools must teach the spirit of goodwill, the habit of helping other people. Therefore, every class must have this rule. Students, if you bring software to class, you may not keep it for yourself. You must share copies with the rest of the class, including the source code, in case someone wants to learn, because this class is a place where we share our knowledge. Therefore, it's not permitted to bring proprietary software to class unless it's for reverse engineering practice. If you bring proprietary software to class, I'll take it away from you. The school, to set a good example, must follow its own rule. It must bring only free software to class and share copies of the source with everyone in the class, except when it's for reverse engineering practice. If you have a relationship with a school, if you are a student, a teacher, an employee, an administrator, or a parent, it's your responsibility to campaign and pressure for the school to move to free software. Now, a large part of this campaign is talking with other people in these communities about the issue, to make them aware of the issue so that some of them will join the campaign. You have to do that. You have to put on pressure. It's not enough to say, oh, would you please think about moving to free software? And they'll say, well, maybe in 100 years we will. No, that's not good enough. You have to insist. Now, if the software in your computer is free, you have control over the computing done in your computer. But does that give you control of your computing? Only if you do your computing in your computer. But nowadays there are services that invite people to entrust their computing to the service, which means these people lose control over how their computing is done because the service controls it. The owner of the server decides what software will do the user's computing. This is called SaaS, Service as a Software Substitute. SaaS means you're going to do some computing, but instead of doing it by running a program in your own computer, you send all the data to a server, where some programs that you don't know about do the computing for you. And you can't see them or touch them because they're someone else's copies in someone else's computer. And then the server sends the result back to you or takes action on your behalf, and you don't control that computing, which means it's an injustice. It's the same injustice as non-free software. In fact, non-free software and SaaS are two mechanisms for the same failure. If you do the computing by running a non-free program, the injustice is you don't control the computing that program does. The users don't control it, it controls the users. If you do the computing with SaaS, then you don't even have the copy that's doing your computing. It's someone else's copy in someone else's server. So you don't control it. So these two different mechanisms lead to the same consequence. Users that don't control the computing that they're doing. So SaaS is pretty much equivalent to running non-free software, but it's even worse. I explained how many non-free programs are spyware. They spy on the user. They send data to some server. Well, with SaaS, the user has to send all the data to the server. It's the same result. The user's data is in a server belonging to someone else, which is going to show it to the US government and some other government. And bad. Oh, and then I explained how some proprietary programs have a universal backdoor that allows someone to forcibly change how the user's computing is done without asking permission. Well, with SaaS, the computing's done in the server. The server owner, at any time, could install different software and change how the user's computing is done. Now, in some sense, since it's his computer, he should be in charge of what software is running in it. He has to be free to change the software. But if that software is doing your computing, he can change how your computing gets done without asking you. So SAS is equivalent to running a non-free program that spies on the user and has a universal backdoor. In other words, SAS is inherently equivalent to proprietary malware. And the remedy is, don't use SAS. Be on the lookout for any service that says it's going to do some computing for you. That's where the computing is yours. What do I mean by that? I'm distinguishing between your own computing and joint computing activities. And we can distinguish them with a thought experiment. How do you tell if a particular computing activity is yours? Well, if you had a powerful enough computer and whatever software you wanted, could you do this computing in your own computer then? If so, the computing is yours, and you deserve to have full control over it, and any server that offers to do it for you is SAS, and you should say no. But there's some activities you couldn't possibly do inside your own computer because they're not just yours, they're joint activities. For instance, if you want to chat with me, you can't do that inside your computer because that would exclude me. Somehow your computer is going to have to work with my computer in order for us to chat. And this proves that chatting is not purely your activity. Now, suppose you want to recognize the words in speech. You could do that in your own computer. You just need a dictation program, which proves that recognizing the words in speech is your own computing. So, when some company offers to recognize the words in speech for you, all you have to do is send the audio signal to the company server, and the company will recognize the words you said and send them back to you, and the company will also record in its server what words you said and show them to Big Brother. This is SAS. This is an injustice. So I'm now starting to get into the point that our computing is not done entirely within our own computers nowadays. So there are ways that we can lose our freedom on the internet. Even if you're using only free software in your own computer, there are other threats to our freedom that have to do with the internet. Now, one of them is surveillance. Of course, we know that ISPs keep records about our internet contacts. This is an injustice. This is a threat to human rights and a threat to democracy. But surveillance is found in many kinds of digital systems, not just in the internet. And it's always a threat to our freedom if we're not careful, if it's not done in a careful way so as to preserve human rights. It turns out that digital technology facilitates total surveillance of everyone, of everything that everyone does. But that means no human rights and no democracy. In the United States, we are subject to more surveillance than people in the Soviet Union. And it's just as oppressive in the US today as it was in the Soviet Union then. The United States government uses this surveillance to attack democracy, to attack dissidents, for instance. People who disagree with government policies and want to organize against it, people who protest. Governments use surveillance to attack protesters, to attack dissent. And we have proof over and over again of this. What is democracy? Democracy means that the people control what the government does. In order to control what the government does, we need to know what the government does. But governments like to do things secretly. How can we control that? We need whistleblowers to tell us what the government is really doing. There's a famous old question: who watches the watchman? Now we know the answer. Whistleblowers watch the watchman. Democracy depends on whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are heroes of democracy. People like Edward Snowden. 3 cheers for Edward Snowden. Hip, hip, hooray. Join me. Hip, hip, hooray. Hip, hip, hooray. Hip, hip, hooray. These whistleblowers must be honored by us, because we have to remind people that they are heroes. Because governments that don't respect human rights call them criminals, try to put them in prison. Obama has launched a war on whistleblowers, a war on journalism, prosecuting and imprisoning whistleblowers one after another, trying to put an end to public knowledge about what the U.S. government is really doing to us and to you and everywhere around the world. But in order to have democracy, we need lots of whistleblowers. We need lots of people ready to tell us the things the government is trying to hide. And the problem is, when the government is trying over and over to imprison whistleblowers, it often succeeds, and it succeeds with the help of total surveillance. If the government tracks who talks with whom through every possible method, the government can find out who the whistleblower is and put the whistleblower in prison, which means people are scared to blow the whistle. It means that they can't escape unless they have both the courage and the careful planning of a Snowden. And that's rare. In order to have enough whistleblowers, we have to reduce the level of surveillance so that the government can't find the whistleblowers anymore, so that people can safely be whistleblowers. So, how can we do this? The usual proposal is to place rules on the government's access to these massive dossiers about everyone. This won't achieve the goal, because the government will surely put in the rules that it's allowed to look at the dossiers to find a criminal. And so once the government calls the whistleblower a criminal, that's the excuse to look at the dossier and find the whistleblower. So these rules are not enough to do this job. In addition, once the data is collected, it will be misused. These databases are misused over and over, both officially and unofficially. The employees look at the database for their own purposes. It's illegal, but they usually get away with it. So, what we need to do is prevent the data from being accumulated in the first place. It's not enough, it's not sufficient to protect democracy and our human rights to say, collect the data and we'll make some rules about when to use it. No, the data must not be there. If there's a rule about how to use the data, well, in 10 years, there might be some shocking crime and the government would use that as an excuse to eliminate the rules. And then the data from 10 years are all there to look at retroactively and attack people. Or they might just ignore the rules. Or they will find an excuse according to the rules to find the whistleblower. So we have to redesign digital systems so that they do not collect data about people in general. We must eliminate massive surveillance. Surveillance should only be possible when there is a court order about a particular person, a particular car, or a particular phone, or whatever. Then surveillance can be done. But for people in general, there won't be a court order, and so they have to be treated as invisible. In the United Kingdom, they track all car travel. They have put license plate cameras. There were people believed to be protesters who were believed to be on the way to a protest to participate. So the forces of tyranny found those people using these cameras and arrested them and held them until the protest was over and then let them go. Meaning they knew that they had no grounds to arrest those people. It was just to sabotage democracy. However, we do want to be able to find stolen cars. And we do want to find cars that are not properly licensed and so on. So here's how we do it. The license plate camera system should have a list of all the valid license plates, plus a list of the license plates that a court has ordered surveillance on. So if the license plate is in the list of valid plates and is not in the special surveillance list, the camera should not see it. That license plate should be invisible, no record kept. If the license plate is not valid, or if it's in the special surveillance list, then the system will report having seen that license plate. This way, it can be used for the surveillance that's legitimate, but cannot be used for the surveillance that's not legitimate. Another technique to make systems safe for democracy is to keep the data dispersed. Consider the difference between a security camera and a surveillance camera. A security camera is pointed at a certain place and makes a recording, which is kept locally. And it's kept for a certain amount of time and then erased automatically. If someone is attacked and reports it, then they can come and look at the recording and maybe find the attacker. But if there's no crime and no one complains, eventually the recording just gets overwritten with another recording. Now, you could imagine in theory that somebody would come every week and copy the recording. It's human rights. So, we must prohibit connecting these cameras to the internet. We must have a legal requirement that they can only make their recordings locally, but these recordings cannot be accessible without going physically to the site. It may seem shocking that I propose laws to limit the use of digital technology so it does not threaten our human rights, but what else are we going to do if we want human rights? A camera pointed at a place where the public is invited, that's on the internet and making it easy for anybody to see who's there for democracy. If you want to help the free software movement, look at gnu.org/help to see a list of several suggestions. For instance, you can write free software. You can become a free software speaker or organizer. That's very important. You could join the Free Software Foundation, which is a way of helping to fund our work. You can do that through fsf.org, or you could do it right here. If you want to pay your dues in cash, you have the opportunity because I'm here. In fsf.org, you will also find resources for the use of free software and political pressure campaigns you can support. For instance, we have a campaign aimed at the World Wide Web Consortium, which is considering a proposal to endorse DRM as part of HTML5. Now that would be a betrayal of the users. If the World Wide Web Consortium does that, it would be choosing the side of some malware developers against all the people who browse the web. Now, I'm not going to be naive and suggest to you that if the World Wide Web Consortium rejects DRM, that DRM will disappear. Of course, those companies like Netflix and Spotify, they're already committing this injustice. Those companies are extremely bad. We should get rid of them. We should certainly never use their services. But fighting to eliminate DRM is going to be a long-term battle. And it's very important which side the W3C takes because it has influence with people. If it endorses DRM, grants it legitimacy, that will be a setback in our fight to eliminate DRM. So it's very important for you to join our campaign. Look at fsf.org/campaigns and you'll see. Now you can also support the Free Software Foundation by buying books and buttons and pins. We also have metallic stickers out there which say GNU/Linux inside. Now, we have to charge for them because they're expensive because they're made of metal. We make them out of metal so that they're durable. The idea is you stick it on your computer and because it's made of metal it doesn't rub off. And this is, if you're using the GNU/Linux system, this is a way to show people that, which again is spreading our message. And if you buy books, I'll sign them. So, and for the ideas of free software, so you can see how to present them to other people, look at gnu.org/philosophy/free software even more important.html. And for the difference between free software and open source, see gnu.org/philosophy/open source misses the point.html. So now it's time for me to present my other identity. I am Saint Ignatius of the Church of Emacs. I bless your computer, my child. Emacs started out as an extensible text editor that I had written, and became a way of life for many users because it was extended so much they could do all their computing without ever leaving Emacs. And then it became a church with the launch of the news group all.religion.emacs, which you might find amusing to visit. In the Church of Emacs, we have a great schism between several rival versions of Emacs. And we also have saints, but fortunately no gods. Instead of gods, we adore the one true editor, Emacs. To be a member of the Church of Emacs, you must pronounce the confession of the faith. You must say, there is no system but GNU, and Linux is one of its kernels. Then, if you become a true expert, you can celebrate that with our ceremony, the Fu Bar Mitzvah, in which you chant a portion of our sacred scriptures, that is to say, the system source code. We also have the cult of the Virgin of Emacs. The Virgin of Emacs means anyone who has never used Emacs. And according to the Church of Emacs, offering the Virgin the opportunity to lose Emacs virginity is a blessed act. We also have the Emacs pilgrimage, which consists of invoking all the commands of Emacs in alphabetical order. There is a Tibetan sect which believes that it's sufficient to invoke these commands automatically under the control of a script over and over. But the mainstream church holds that in order to gain spirit under your control or set up for your regular use, and install a wholly free operating system where wholly can be written in more than one way. I'll wait for the translator now. And then only use and install free software with and on the system. If you make this vow and you live by it, then you too will be a saint and you'll have the right to wear a halo if you can find one, because they don't make them anymore. There is a traditional rivalry between Emacs and another editor, VI. So people occasionally ask whether in the Church of Emacs the use of VI is a sin. It's true that VI is the editor of the beast in Roman numerals. But using a free implementation of VI is not a sin, it's a penance. And people have occasionally asked whether my Halo is really an old computer disk. This is my Halo. But it was a computer disk in a previous life. So thank you. Time for the auction. This is order. We can accept payment either in cash or with a credit card if it can make international purchases by phone. When you bid, please wave your arm and shout the amount so I can hear you, because I have hearing problems. So speak loud and clear like this, and I'll know what you bid. Please be silent if you are not bidding. And I'm going to have to start with its more or less its regular price, which is 1,000 NT. So, do I get 1,000 for this adorable canoe?
Yes.
How much do you bid? 1,000? I've got 2,000. Do I get 2,200? I've got 2,000. Do I get 2,200 for this adorable canoe? Do I get 2,200 for this adorable canoe? 2,200 to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. How much? 2,400. I've got 2,400. Do I get 2,600 or more? I've got 2,400. Do I get 2,600 or more? 2,600 or more for this adorable canoe. 2,600 or more to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. I've got 3,000. Do I get 3,300? I've got 3,000. Do I get 33? How much? 3,500 you're bidding? I don't understand what he said. 3,500. Okay, I've got 3,500. Do I get how much? 4,000. I've got 4,000. Do I get 4,500? Who's saying? You're saying 5,000? I've got 5,000. Do I get 5,500? I got for this adorable canoe that needs 5,500 to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. Do I get 5,500? Last chance to bid. What? 5,500. I've got 5,500. Do I get 6,000? I've got 5,500. Do I get 6,000? 6,500. How much? I've got 6,500. Do I get 7,000? I've got 6,500. Do I get 7,000 for this adorable canoe? 7,000 to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom?
7,000.
I've got 7,000. Do I get 7,500? Last chance. I've got 95. Do I get 10,000? Do I get 10,000 for this adorable canoe? It would take ages to reach the same conclusion. So, do I get 11,000? Do I get 12? There will be time for you to go to a bank machine and come back here while I answer questions. So I've got 11,000. Do I get 12? 12,000, last chance.
50,000.
15. That's 15000. I've got 15,000. 15,000. Do I get 16? I've got 15,000. Do I get 16 for this adorable canoe? 16,000 to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. Last chance to bid 16,000 or more. Last chance. Going. Gone for 15,000. Please come down. Meanwhile, it's time for questions. Yeah. Please come down, but I can answer a question before he gets here. Yes, here's an idea. There's a method that works very well. You keep the microphone here, and people come here and queue up to ask the questions. Instead of transporting the microphone around the room, which is slow, if people queue up to ask the questions, it's faster and it's fairer, because when you get in the queue, you have your place in the queue and you will get to ask.
Nice to see you, and thanks for the inspiring talk. I have four questions here. The first one is that you mentioned about surveillance, and it worries me because nowadays our network backbone is controlled by telecom companies or even government.
Yes, you could get straight to the point if you've got four questions, making the question brief.
So is there anything we can do about it for freer infrastructure?
Political organizing for human rights, including no surveillance. That's what you have to do. There's no shortcut. Sure, we would like to be able to protect ourselves by developing clever technology, but that just, you can't do very much that way. There are a few things you can do, but in general, to have privacy again, we need to organize to put a stop to the massive surveillance, and that's political. Next.
Okay, and you mentioned about Android. So Google, because Google is claiming their excuse me.
Sorry, it's what? Can't hear you.
Yeah, Google claiming their do no evil principle, but meanwhile they are trying to avoid freeing their software. So is there?
Well, actually, here's the thing. Android is free software, but the free stuff is not complete. It's not enough of the system to actually use anything. And normally Android comes with some non-free software too, which is not a good thing.
Yes, and in your opinion.
But in any case, for more information about Android and free software issues, look at GNU.org/philosophy/Android and users freedom.html.
Yes, so what I'm concerning is that in the business side, this company can we trust them or just the community?
Non-free software, you can't trust anybody.
But
non-free software is software for suckers.
Okay, I see. So the next question, I can see that you strongly opposed to DRM and open source movement. That even
they're not the same. DRM is evil. Most open source software is free software. It's just a different philosophy. And it's not that it's wrong, it's rather that it's weak and it's based on mistaken values.
Okay, but doesn't it deprive the freedom of choice for the creators if they really want to use DRM or protect their work?
First of all, you've just made a confusion. When I advocate a policy and a philosophy, that doesn't directly have any effect on anybody but me. Now, what I'm saying to you is DRM and non-free software generally are an injustice, so for your sake you should reject them. Now, that's not directly making anybody do anything. That's just some advice you can follow or not. However, DRM is a malicious practice, and I believe it should be illegal. Let's suppose we make DRM illegal. That's about as bad as making theft and other nasty behaviors illegal. It's wrong. People shouldn't do that. Now, there are people who try to destroy the idea of freedom by twisting it up, by saying people should have the freedom to take away other people's freedom. No, that's not what freedom means. That's just a Russell paradox designed to destroy the conceptual idea of freedom. Freedom is...
As a user, I heard many rights this afternoon that we should fight for. But when we stand on the defender's shoes, open source means open no harm.
I'm not in favor of open source. Don't talk with me about open source. All I have to say about it is it's something I don't agree with.
All right, so, but if I don't open source, I don't know.
I'm sorry, I don't want to have I won't have a discussion with you about whether open source is good or bad, because that's not what I stand for. It never was. Open source is the slogan of people who disagree with me.
Yeah, but you mentioned that if I don't open source.
No, I didn't say anything about open source except it's not what I believe in. People. Why don't you just go into their houses and take their stuff? Then you'll make a lot of money. Or you could become a corrupt politician. You could make a lot of money that way. You could swindle people. You know, there are a lot of ways to make money that are wrong. And if a corrupt politician says, well, if I started being honest, I couldn't make money.
Free software really makes the world better. I don't want to live in a world without Google.
Well, get a job doing something else. If you notice, he is claiming that the way to make the world better is to enable him to make money. There are lots of businesses that say we should give up our human rights because the way to make the world better is to let the business make money. For instance, there are, university is probably going to be underwater. They're talking about 4 meters of sea level rise from the unstoppable melting of the Antarctic ice. But these companies say, well, to make the world a better place, we have to be able to make money. That's the #1 criteria, is how much money we can make. That is never a sufficient reason, not when something important is at stake. Now, if there's nothing important, hurting people by saying you want to make money. If you can't make money doing this, do that. Or else ask for welfare. Next question.
So you are telling us the free software is as important as global warming, because
it's hard to compare these two different kinds of injustices. You know, global heating causes flooding of some areas, it will wipe out species. That's really, really bad. I'm not sure if taking away people's freedom is as bad as that, but it's still very bad. It's bad enough that people shouldn't do it.
All right, I have it done. Thank you.
I'm not 100% sure. Some license, like MIT license, seems less restrictive than GPL.
That's right. That's the problem with them. You see, the GNU GPL defends users' freedom. It's a copyleft license. The GNU General Public License, which I wrote, says to anybody who wants to redistribute it, you can redistribute it, but you must respect the freedom of the next person. So we defend freedom for every user. Whereas pushover licenses, such as, well, the expat license or there are 2 different licenses that some people call MIT. I think that name should not be used. But let's talk about those these non-copyleft free licenses. They don't defend freedom. So they give party A permission to make a proprietary modified version and offer that to you, and then if you use it, you lose your freedom. So it's a mistake in most cases to release your software. Is it free software or proprietary software? With source code? That you mean gratis, you mean Mianfei.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not talking about Mianfei, I'm talking about 自由 information to the developers. And certainly if you find a bug, you probably want to send information to the developers. But since people are free, they can answer questions if they wish, but they're not forced to.
Thank you.
Hello again. So, in your past 30+ year experience, what?
So to forbid this, and of course cooks cook the recipe when they want to. They don't need to get permission to make a certain recipe. So in fact, cooks behave with more or less with the 4 freedoms in using their recipes. And it would be oppressive to take them away. So this is one more argument that I know.
But what if the people they don't care, and they say,
I don't know.
It's delicious.
Some people do care. In any case, the people who are eating it Those are not analogous. The user of the recipe is the cook.
Okay, thank you.
So the people eating the food, that's like, well, you ran a program and you made some output and you show the output to people. But they're not, those people are not using the program at all. By the way, where is the purchaser of the GNU? Is the purchaser of the GNU here?
Probably at the ATM.
Oh, here he is. Okay. So I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, one last question. Would it be a concern to you that the free software movement actually fuels the terrorism?
I don't see that it does.
Okay.
But the thing is, terrorism is not as bad as tyranny. When governments propose nasty measures in the name of stopping terrorism, we have to on the hope that will, at least in the United States, I hope it will be overturned.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me, I want to ask, while we serving in the internet, the networking devices, operation system might not free software. Now, is there any chance to use this approach in the internet by free?
I don't understand all the words, but if you're talking about things like routers, is that what you mean?
My meaning is networking devices.
Sorry, that's a very
routers,
vague, abstract term. What did networking devices mean? Maybe if you tell him in Chinese, he could understand, and he'll tell me what you want to ask.
我想问说，就是上网的时候会用到那个路由器跟交换器，但是这些路由器交换器它的 OS 可能不是 free software。
I see. Well, some of them can run free software. You can buy routers that you can, where you can replace the software with free software.
Writing by myself.
You don't have to write it. It's already written. It's already there. It's already done. By the way, be careful. Don't buy routers made in the US. You can't trust them.
Okay, thank you.
Let's say that I am not a programmer. What if there is no libre alternative to a solution?
Well, then if you want freedom, you don't use software for that thing. To use a non-free program means it takes away your freedom. If you want freedom, you don't use non-free software. Now, if you really want to do that thing, maybe you should write a free program to do it. Or maybe you should launch a project and start raising funds to do that. I mean, basically, what we see is there are a lot of people who are looking for an excuse to give up. So they say, I'd like to have freedom, but it's hard. It's not trivially easy for me to have freedom. There would be some cost, some inconvenience. So they say, doesn't this mean I should just give up and lose my freedom? Well, that depends on how much you value freedom. There are people who say, I'd love to switch to free software for doing this job as soon as there's a free program that is just as convenient as this non-free program I'm using. So they're saying, I won't do any work for freedom. I won't make any sacrifice for freedom. I'll accept freedom from you when you hand it to me on a silver platter. And so these people are saying they don't value freedom anymore.
Personally, no, what do you mean?
Well, I personally have not been threatened. I mean, there are people who are being threatened. For instance, journalists are being threatened, and whistleblowers are being threatened. But so far, free software developers are not being threatened, at least not that I know of. At least not by governments, that is. Oh, with one exception. There are countries that have. So, yes, in that area, people are being threatened personally. So, Russian programmers should beware of going to scientific conferences in the United States.
Nice to meet you. I have a question. There are some free software with GPL license. In the end, it turns out non-free software. For example, MySQL.
That's not true. MySQL is free software. And it still is free software.
Oracle remove the license of MySQL. And my question is...
Well, I don't, does anyone know what's actually happening? As far as I know, Oracle is still distributing MySQL as free software. But maybe I don't know the latest facts.
Okay.
In any case, Oracle could make a new version of MySQL and release it as non-free software. But the existing free versions of MySQL will still be there.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Rico. I'm from nice to meet you, Dr. Stallman. And I don't have any technical background, so
Could you get straight to the question and not apologize?
Okay, sorry. Sorry. Yes, I work at school, and I work at not elementary school. I work at middle school, and I always propose our managers to encourage them to use free software. But you know, most of the people they only care about the convenience of using the product.
Perhaps you should show them the article where I presented these ethical issues.
Yes, but
did you try that yet?
Yes, I tried that, but there are too many people that don't care about any ethics.
Okay.
Okay,
what to do next? First of all, I don't have a guaranteed recipe for convincing people. That's hard to do. But what you could try doing is, you could use free software in your class, maybe. Or B, you could look for another school where they care about freedom and move there. I mean, it's basically, you have to start, the first thing to try is to ask the people in that school by yourself. And if that doesn't work, well, what else can you try? You can try recruiting other people to pressure them. You can try quitting. You can, try just personally doing things differently. And maybe you can think of some other things to do. The point is, be persistent, and if one method doesn't work, try another.
That's a very good suggestion. Thank you.
So now I want to sell the GNU. How do you want to text? Okay. I can't hear you at all, I'm sorry.
He's getting married.
December this year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You going to marry the GNU? Thank you. And would you like me to sign it for you?
签名。
What? I'm afraid I can't understand that. You tell me.
Oh, it's keyboard.
Keyboard? What should I do with this keyboard?
Sign on the keyboard.
Sign on the keyboard.
So what is your
Well,
keyboard? You want to show us?
I don't know. I have to see. This is a happy hacking keyboard. So this should work. Here. I think I should sign on the bottom because if I sign on this, basically it'll rub off. And there's not much space. I can sign here. Yeah, I can sign here. Okay, I did it. Here you are. And it's in a place where you don't normally touch it, so it should last. But you could put transparent tape over it, and then it really won't wear away. Oh, okay. So we need to show each other ID. So here's my key fingerprint, and here is my passport. So now I need your key fingerprint and your passport. Set it up wherever it's good.
好了，拿外面的这个，我不晓得外面有没有，评委，有没有外面有没有要签名的？帮我问一下。哦，有在这里。OK，come on，come here。